Welcome back, everyone, to the Family Entrepreneur Life live show. Now, I realize you are seeing me for the second time today. We have a special double feature going on due to our rescheduled live last week. I was feeling pretty miserable. So we are back. I am your host, Ariana Sylvester, and I believe we are on episode number 12. And I say that because earlier today was episode number 11. Today, I've got Bob Minhas with us here, and he's got a pretty interesting and just very, I don't even know what to say, like motivational story to share with us about his journey as an entrepreneur. So, Bob,
Yes.
why don't you, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, give us your family dynamic, all that good stuff.
Sure. So thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate you being patient with me. This is our third attempt, take 3.
Third time's a charm. Woo!
Time's always a charm for sure. So I'm Bob Minhas. So I am a father of 3 beautiful, perfect children. I get every parent says that, but really it's true for me. And I've been an entrepreneur for about 15 years. I went through a bit of a bump, I'd say in 2013, 2012. So in about 2012, I started realizing that I wasn't living the life that I really wanted to. And my family and my wife and I at the time had gone through some transitions and some changes. And I was running the company with her. She was, the smart one with all the numbers. I was the one doing the physical work. We had an audio video security company, a tech company. So we started going through these changes, and it kind of affected our marriage. So we started seeking counseling and trying to work it out, and ultimately it wasn't something that we could really make work. So after all that time, we decided that we were going to separate, which was not easy for either of us. Our kids were really young at the time, so that was about 4 years ago, so really, really young. So yeah, we decided to make that change, and I ended up moving out. And the thing about it was, we had a company that was really wildly successful on paper, but if you looked at our bank account, we really were living month to month. We were living well month to month for the most part, but we were living that life. So I couldn't afford to rent another place or buy another house, nor could she. So I made a decision. I told her I don't want the kids to be impacted, and she agreed. So I left and I moved into my 2011 Ford, and wasn't a Focus, Ford Fusion, which isn't as roomy as the Ford ads say. I really was thinking about writing Ford Fusion. You can't really sleep in a Ford Fusion. So I lived, so I ended up being homeless for about a year while I sort of worked on trying to repair my relationship with my kids and working with my ex-wife to develop something that was sustainable in terms of support and childcare and how the kids get to manage emotionally. And so, I went through a really rough time because after that change, I really lost my identity. So when I had my company, I used to be really prevalent on uniforms. So I was like Inspector Gadget, where every day I had the same. I wouldn't have to think in the morning. I just go up and be like, yes, 2-6, So I remember when the divorce happened and the company became part of that mediation that we really couldn't do a lot. I didn't have any clothes. I didn't know what to wear. And then I realized that was kind of my identity. I didn't know what I wanted to wear. I started wearing track pants. And now imagine, a guy living in his car in his track pants. That's the ultimate in homelessness. So, I struggled to really identify and understand who I was really, or who I wanted to be, and I had all of these concepts of being a great father, being a perfect co-parent. And, it was a year, it was a very tough year. And if you've ever done a Canadian winter, living in a car in a Canadian winter is not something I would highly not recommend at all. And don't get me wrong, I had people that would let me couch surf once in a while. There was a time when I actually lived in a storage unit, but they caught me. So I ended up having to move out. But at the end of it all, it was this struggle of this is who I was. And out of all of who I was trying to be, ultimately the one that led me the most was being a father. Because when I had a company, my ex and I had a really great definition of, she was a stay-at-home mom. She was great to be the caregiver. I was the guy that was the breadwinner. I'd come home and see them when I could, but I worked 12-hour days, almost 6-7 days a week. And I realized at that time, at the divorce, coming to visit my kids on the weekend, I didn't really know my kids. I didn't know much about them, and I was realizing I didn't know a lot about me. And so it was a tough time realizing that I had missed a a good 6-7 years of my children's lives, and I didn't realize it until then. So I worked on that. I worked on trying to be a better father and trying to be relatable to them, but I had my own demons that I was battling. So it was really tough. It was really tough for me, and it was really tough for my ex-wife because we were still struggling to communicate.
So take
yes,
me back.
sorry. Yeah.
Take me back to that. How did you make that decision ultimately? Because I feel like that is not a very common decision that I have heard, or that many people would be able to make that big of a sacrifice for your family and your wife, who was going to become your ex-wife. A lot of people carry the resentments of things not working, and even though it would have affected your kids, most people probably would have said, well, let's sell the house and do this thing 50-50. How did you come to that conclusion in your head to, like, I'm going to make this sacrifice and I'm going to do what I have to do so that my family can stay where they are and live their life, and I'll figure things out?
Well, I think there were a couple of things which I'm really honest about. Is number one, when I grew up with my mom and dad, they were divorced parents. I had divorced parents. We weren't close. I'm very honest in that we weren't. They weren't. They loved me, but they weren't loving people. We didn't say that. So I'm sure you hear this from a lot of parents. When I became a parent, I wanted to give my kids what I didn't have. Right? Mm-hmm. So it was always safety and security. So when it was time to make that decision, it wasn't a question. What would make them feel the safest and securest? They would be staying in the home. What would make them feel safe and secure with their mom, with dad not being there? Because if I was there, their mom was reacting. And that their mom's sadness was their sadness. Ultimately, any effect that my ex-wife had emotionally was affecting them. So that was an easy thing. But I'll be honest with you. The other thing was I was really arrogant. I was a different man then than I am now, or I like to think so. I'm still working on myself. But I was pretty arrogant. I remember telling my ex-wife, don't worry about it. I can make it work. I grew a company to $250,000, and I've been on HGTV. I could live in a car for a year and run a company. And I was so arrogant. So part of me was I wanted to give the best to my kids, but that fear of, like, I would have made that decision ultimately with that fear or not, but I didn't have fear. I had this arrogance that said, yeah, I got no problem. I got this, no problem. And it was a really humbling experience, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for being so honest. I mean, that's the other part of this too. Most people wouldn't be so open about a story like this because, all of us have that fear of the judgment and fear of showing the vulnerability and, sharing our true feelings. But I think it's so important for people to see that and for people to hear that, and to understand, like, these are the things that go through our heads at certain points in our life. And especially as entrepreneurs, making those sacrifices and knowing, like, hey, there's other people out there that have made huge sacrifices in their life and they've come out on the other side a better person. So even just hearing that, I hope that there's people out there watching that are like, oh my gosh, I can do this. I can sacrifice things if need be and go through and still be an entrepreneur and, learn a lot about myself and come out on the other side a much better person.
Mm-hmm. Ultimately, I'm really honest in that what saved me was following the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because when I turned and I defined, and I wasn't an alcoholic, but when I just turned and defined arrogance as an addiction, the moment I realized me being I was just so addicted to the highs and the lows, right?
Yeah.
Following those 12 steps is what really sort of got me out of it.
Okay. And so take me through how your entrepreneurial role has changed, because you went from having that company to now you've kind of pivoted, and you, through your growth of having that situation that you had to kind of work through, now you've come out on the other side with a really cool concept and business that you're building right now.
Ultimately, right now, yeah. So when I was in the car, I started 2 new companies. Mm-hmm. So I started an online marketing company. Yeah, I started an online marketing company with a staff of 10 and a payroll of about $30,000 a month, which was overwhelming for a guy that lived in a car. Mm-hmm. And I had an IT company, and then I took 2 full-time jobs as contractor. So really, I had 4, if you would, companies that I was trying to run. So throughout 2014, they just faltered. They just failed and faltered, and I did a lot of damage to a lot of relationships. And I had a lot of personal growth to go through before I realized, I had a lot of internal issues. Ultimately, what happened was at the end of 2014, I got really, really sick in the car in the winter and ended up in the hospital. And the doctor basically said, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to die because you're not built for this, right? Homeless people who live outside, they generally develop smart ways of surviving. I was not trained, right? I was just this guy that had this arrogance that said, yeah, I just put a sweater and I'm fine. And you don't realize that. So ultimately what happened is this opportunity came up with a municipality, a city in an area that was one of my sleeping homes, right? One of my areas. And it was an opportunity it was a pilot project where they were trying to get business consulting in rural communities. So this was the city, and then around the city were all of these communities with maybe 10, 20, 30,000 people living in it. But they were still entrepreneurs in those communities, not getting the support they needed. Yeah. So it was a job, but it was a contract. So my logic in my mind was, it's still entrepreneurial. So I went for the first interview, and it turns out it was entrepreneurial. I had to basically build a program from scratch. They had nothing. And I said, okay, so you want me to do this? And they said, yeah, absolutely, but you have to do it in the government structure. So I thought, okay, well, living in a car, government structure, I'll take the government structure. But ultimately, it was still pretty entrepreneurial. So after 2 more interviews over 3 months, I remember I would have to always go to I had a membership at a gym so I could shower and shave. So I would always go there, shower and shave. And I remember the owners would look at me like, we love that you use our gym, but you never use the equipment. I don't understand. So ultimately, after 3 interviews, got that role, which was an amazing role. Part of my journey was humbling myself to be able to accept that I need not be this arrogant and that I had a lot of work to do on myself. But when I got this role, now I was working with people who, when I would ask them, what's your definition of success, they would literally say, I want enough money to feed my family, have a comfortable living, and for my kids to go to college. And I would say to them, you live in waterfront property. Why would you not have a boat or a big mansion? And they would say, we don't want any of that. So I spent 2 years working with entrepreneurs that said, this is all I want, and I know what I want. I just need your help getting what I want. And it was completely humbling. It blew me away. I would help them build systems. I had over 2 years, I ended up working with 400 entrepreneurs. And of those 400, not a one of them ever questioned, what it is they needed to do. If, we would tell them, you need to work on this business plan, or let's talk about marketing or so. They never questioned it. And it was so humbling. And I realized that was my issue. My issue was I looked at my ex-wife and I said, I can live in a car, don't worry about it. Whereas these people were asking for help. They were saying, I want this and I can do this, but I need your help. And so that was a game changer for me, huge. So out of that came this idea of Entrepreneur House. So Entrepreneur House is this idea where it's got a 4 sort of tier system, and I don't mind sharing it. It's a big plan, so if anybody wants to emulate it, I'm happy to do that, because ultimately the goal is to help entrepreneurs, but also leaders and C-level executives and professionals. So ultimately, it was meant to be this collection of mentors that supported entrepreneurs on 3 core categories. One of them being the business skill set. So there's a difference between a business owner and an entrepreneur, and that's a discussion I know you and I have had in your group. So we need to give them business skill sets. The second is we need to give them support and structure on relationships. And when I say relationships, I don't just mean family. As somebody who's single, there's dynamics of dating, there's dynamics of other relationships as an entrepreneur. There's family relationships, so familiar relationships. One of the businesses I have is with my mom. So that's an experience in of itself. So that's another core pillar that we often comment on. And then the third is health and wellness. And, living in that car, one of the best things that happened to me is I lost a ton of weight. And so, I didn't lose it healthily or in a health-wise fashion. So I stuck to that. I started developing sort of healthier systems, both for my body and my mind. I started really following meditation style thinking and, just sort of doing friendectomies and cutting people out of my life that just weren't great for my mental health. So those 3 pillars are what we built Entrepreneur House on. And by having a collection of mentors, it allows us to be continuously evolving. Because as much as I like to lead and grow and develop, I admit that there are certain skill sets that I need help with as well. So that's really what Entrepreneur House is. It's this collection of, hey, come in and let's talk about these 3 core components. And then we start getting into the monetization. So then we start saying, do you want one-on-one help or group help? That's where the monetization comes in. And so we charge for that. And ultimately what I'd love to see is, now we're talking about conferences and events across the US and Canada. And then eventually, ultimately, I would love Entrepreneur House to be a physical house, which is a 52-day intake program where entrepreneurs, leaders, or professionals or C-level executives can basically check in and get rebuilt. Because that's what happened to me, Ariana, right? Is I got rebuilt. I was this one guy. I had to lose everything and fall to the bottom and then slowly build myself back up. And my belief is if we can build a house in every province and in every state where people can get in and just find that transformation without having to suffer or without having to lose, that's my ultimate goal. In 10 years, that's what I ultimately would love to see.
I love that. So walk me through, what do you think your biggest, I don't know how I want to say this, your biggest area of growth, or like your biggest lesson you learned on this journey so far?
You know what? It's humility, because, I grew up as an only child in an East Indian family, which meant I was the champ. There you go. But in an East Indian family, it means I'm king, right? So, I grew up very spoiled and even when my parents divorced, I grew up with this sense of entitlement. And what's interesting is throughout my marriage, my ex-wife was really great. I actually learned a lot from my ex-wife. I credit a lot to her in terms of learning a lot of my marketing and sales. I was an introvert before when I met her. So that was interesting. But ultimately it was, that arrogance is going to kill me. And that arrogance almost did kill me. That's, what the doctor said, is you're about to die. But ultimately, whatever I did, whatever I built, whatever I taught my kids, if it was aligned with arrogance, it was never going to work, and it was actually going to backfire. So that was a hard lesson. That was a hard lesson to realize that I am not king, but that I am a part of this universe that needs me to contribute back to it. I couldn't just continually take. That was a hard lesson. That took a good year for that humility to take place.
Yeah, I love that, the humility. That's a big one, I think, for a lot of entrepreneurs, because I'm going to quote somebody. Heather Gray was on as one of our guest experts, and one of her quotes was, "Entrepreneurs need to stop thinking they're so special." Yeah. And it sounds kind of mean, but in a way, it's true. I think a lot of entrepreneurs think that, like, because they have that thinking outside the box and thinking differently, that kind of puts you at a level above people that are working a traditional job and are okay with that traditional path in life. But it's really just two different paths,
Sure.
So having that humility.
And she's right. Ultimately, we need those people in our society to be able to operate. If we had a society full of entrepreneurs, we would die. You ultimately need people who are right. You ultimately need people who are willing to be parts of a greater machine. And I don't want to call them cogs, but they're truly part of a greater machine. If we didn't have people who were willing to do the work as a transit driver, or work in our municipalities, or represent our government, if we didn't have these people who are willing to do that, entrepreneurs couldn't flourish, right? It just wouldn't happen. Now, along Heather's point, for sure, you have to have that humility that, we're not special. But, I'm still very cognizant to tell entrepreneurs that you have a superpower. I learned that from our friend Arnie Gitt, right? You have a superpower. The superpower is, it's amazing, because right now I'm serving a contract with another city and another municipality for some time to help them with some downtown rebuy. And a lot of people will approach me and say, well, after the contract, do you want us to renew? And I literally tell them no. And when they say why, I just tell them, I'll just go back to entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is the ultimate superpower. It gives you safety, security. It gives you confidence. So ultimately, maybe not special, but definitely superpower for sure.
Yeah. It's definitely a superpower. So right. You said your previous job working with in the company with your wife, and then trying to go through all of that your relationship with your kids was not where you wanted it to be. And then, obviously you had that rough year in the transition. Mm-hmm. What steps did you take to kind of repair that and put that back on track for you and your family? Because I know that there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there that have that problem of, working, and there's a gap that forms between you and your family. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of a tough thing to get a hold of and try to start putting those pieces back together. So how did you kind of approach that so that you could be the dad you wanted to be and have that relationship with your kids while you were still, becoming the entrepreneur you are?
So it's interesting. It still is an evolving process. So when I started, I did everything I could to spend all the time I could with my kids. And I was just getting burnt out because when I was with the kids, I wasn't me. I was trying too hard. I was malnourished. I was just tired all the time. I was cranky. And ultimately what I realized is I had to go back and work on me, because as much as I could be there for them, I wasn't really present. So then I had to sort of claw back and talk to my ex-wife about, spending less time so that I could work on myself. So I got a counselor, and I worked with this counselor on two things. Number one, how to better identify these gaps that I need to fix within me, and then how to better spend time with my children. And, that took a good year of learning those skill sets, and I would apply them. One of the things that came out of that, which is I started having date nights with my kids. So, my ex-wife would say things to me. For example, we have a daughter, and she would say, your daughter is going to marry you. Like, your daughter, when she grows up, is going to find a guy like you. And that terrified me. So, for real. So what I started doing was I would spend time with my daughter, and we would do one-on-one dates, and I would come to the flower. I would open the door I still do that. We still do our one-on-one dates 4 years later, because it's very important for me to understand what to expect of men in her as she grows up. But more importantly, I want to be the father that she could, trust and love and really, maybe emulate. So ultimately that's what I did with my daughters. And then out of it, quite accidentally, my boys started learning some stuff. My boys started learning how to interact with their mom and other women in their class, because they were seeing me do it. And so it became this side benefit where, my oldest would learn to open doors for women, or they would say please and thank you, or my youngest would bring a flower to his mom. And so then we started spending that time with them individually. And with the boys, I started having one-on-one time with them, and I would ask them what's going on with their lives. My oldest, as he's starting to mature, he's starting to have those body changes, so we start trying to talk about that. So it's just a slow process. But so back to your question, this is what I did. Here's my secret formula. I literally have 2 counselors now. I still see a counselor once a month for maintenance. So I don't see her because I feel like, I have these dark demons to deal with. Ultimately, we all have demons that we have to deal with. I see her for maintenance. So it's a sort of a check-in and, here things are going. And I have a separate counselor I see just to talk about my kids. And I talk about best practices with her, what's going on with my ex-wife, what's going on with us and our dynamic, and what's going on with the kids. And she helps me really sort of look at, I'll give you a great example. This is a really vulnerable thing to share because I haven't even talked to my ex-wife about this. But in our last session, I would be honest in that sometimes I would look at my relationship with my kids as a competition with my ex-wife. So my ex-wife would be able to do this and offer them this, and I couldn't do that. And it was really hard for me. It was really hard because I felt like I wasn't living up to the parent that she was. And Tara, I can say her name, Tara. So this counselor, Tara, would say, you really need to not look at what you're doing wrong. You need to look at what Star's not able to do. Talk to my ex-wife and ultimately ask her what she's gapping on and fill that gap. And then the second thing is look at what you're really good at. And so what is it you're really good at? So I would say, well, I love ideating, right? So whenever their mom would have a birthday, I wouldn't go buy a gift. We would go through a business model canvas. So we would say, all right, let's do some preliminary research on what mommy wants. Great. Now let's do some validation with grandma and her friends. Great. Now let's look at, is this something we buy or purchase? And then what, you know what I mean? So we would start doing that stuff. So she would say, start doing that in conjunction with what your ex-wife is doing. So if your ex-wife is taking them to a festival, the next day you take them to a picnic. And it just ultimately changed my vision of how to spend time with my kids. The other thing I learned from her was I started asking my kids what they wanted to do. Now, my ex-wife didn't agree with that. She says, if you ask 3 young kids what they want to do, they're going to drive you nuts. But ultimately, they started becoming decision makers, and to a degree. And that's how my relationship started forming with them, is I feel like instead of me telling them what to do, ultimately I do parent them. I ask them, what is it, not that they want to do, but what is it they want to learn? Right? So it's all in your vernacular. What is it you guys want to learn today? Or what is it you want to become? Or what is it you want to attempt? And when I changed my vernacular, I started getting more stuff out of them. And we started experimenting and trying new things. And we started going to different events outside of our community and so that they could experience it. So that was my ultimate secret. It was having that conversation. It was having that regular counselor, was having those open and honest conversations with my ex-wife to say, this is what I like to do. What do you think? For example, I said camping. My ex-wife said, that's not going to work. So having that conversation with her saved me from embarrassing myself. So that's what it is. It's just conversation, asking for help. Again, everything I do is always what I've learned in being entrepreneurial, right? So ultimately, what is it? this is horrible. And people watching, they're going to think I'm horrible. But ultimately, my kids are my customer. So what is it my customer wants? How do I validate what my customer wants? And ultimately, how do I deliver what I have internally? So that's how I've totally formulated that, to the point where, my ex and I now talk about me having the kids overnight and me having the kids for a week during the summer. These are big steps for me. Ultimately, I was always traveling and always around. I never had the kids like that. So over the last 4 years, that's what's, I'm rambling and ranting, but it's just exciting when I talk about it because I just want to share everything that
I love it, though. I'm going to jump back to two different points there. One of those is the openness that you share about, having the counselors, but I want to just bring people's attention to the fact that mindset is such a huge part of not only being an entrepreneur, but it also carries over into the relationships and into, as a parent, your relationship with your kids as well. So, it's not, maybe you don't have a counselor all the time. Like you said, you have maintenance for some of that, but even just having someone that you're comfortable with discussing the mindset. I do. Her name is Heather Gray. And I am not shy about that fact. When I have stuff going on up here that I can't figure out and Tom can't help me figure out, that's the next place I go. And it's just been so big in my own personal development to acknowledge the fact that something's going on that I can't fix and need help with, and to then go out and seek that help, because I think there's a big difference between acknowledging the fact that you need that and then actually going and doing it. And I know a lot of people don't have the humility to go out and seek that help and say, hey, I've got stuff going on up here. I could really use your assistance on working through this. And the second point is I feel like that everything you talked about with your kids is amazing. And I want to turn around and start doing that with our own. Yeah. And you don't have to have any issues or things that you're trying to work out to apply those things that you just mentioned with your kids right now. I mean, asking them what they want to learn as opposed to what they want to do, huge. Yeah. And then not looking at it as a competition. And I know, you have a different situation having an ex-wife and you, but even in a marriage where there's a couple and there's the mom and the dad, I know there's a lot of people that feel that little bit of competition sometimes, or like, oh, the kids are mommy's the favorite or daddy's the favorite.
For sure, because there's always a good cop and a bad cop. So a lot of relationships where they're married, it still feels competitive. So how, what can dad do that he's really great at, and what can mom do that she's really great at? Right? That's
for sure. And I mean, just acknowledging that and thinking about how can I think about this differently? I'm not competing with my spouse. I am better at this, so I'm going to take care of this. And he's better at this. So like, he's the player. I do not want to be rough and tumble around on the floor. That's just not my thing. I'm going to do a puzzle. Yeah. I'll color with you. Yeah. But we know that about ourselves. And so when our daughter wanted to go camping in the backyard because her grandparents bought her a tent, thanks a lot. We spent in the backyard, and Daddy went camping in the backyard with her. And she keeps saying, like, Mommy, you have to come camping. And I'm honest with her. And I say, camping out in the backyard is really not Mommy's thing, honey. I'll go out there and play with you. We can read some stories, but there is no way I'm spending the night out there in that tent with you. Yeah. So, it's being honest about that. What are you good at? What things can you teach your kids by acknowledging that and embracing that in yourself, and then asking them those questions. So I love that. Before we wrap it up, I want to ask you what one piece of advice you have for the entrepreneurs that are either watching now or are watching the replay. What would you say to them?
I'm really blessed in Entrepreneur House that I tend to find myself working with more mompreneurs. I don't know if it's that, the women in our community tend to ask for help more than men, or just how it plays out. But what I'm always talking to them about is there's always this concept of mom guilt, and there is a concept of dad guilt as well, where they feel like they're spending less time with their children. The best advice I can give any parent who's also an entrepreneur is integration. And that's everything you do, right? Integrate your entrepreneurial life with your kids. as the kids get older, I take them to entrepreneur events. So if I'm mentoring somewhere, they come with me. If I'm doing a trade show and if they can handle it, if it's not, I bring them with me. I take them to entrepreneurial events, and we've started doing budgeting now. So I give them each money in their wallet. They have to budget that money among the entrepreneurs in the community. So integrate it, because while they're shopping with my eye on them, it still allows me the ability to network and communicate with the other entrepreneurs in my community. Integration is the best thing. And I see a lot of parents, couples who are married, and they'll say, well, I left the kids with the dad so I could focus. I totally get that. But take the time to integrate, right? Take the time to integrate and look for opportunities. And I promise you, not only will you have a much more successful business because you're not picking time and choosing time, you're giving your kids a skill set that I'm going to probably get a lot of bad flack for it. They can't learn in school. I've seen schools try and integrate entrepreneur 101 classes. It is not the same. And the best part is they're learning it from you. So they're learning your core value, they're learning your ethics, and they're learning something from you that no one can ever take away from them.
Yeah,
right? So those are, so integration is huge when you have children, no matter their age. No matter their age, right? Eventually they probably become great grumpy teens, but I'm sure there's still a way to go.
Yes, I love that. That is one of our favorite words. That's what we talk about, instead of balance, it's the integrating of
Absolutely.
Your life and your business together. So that's the perfect way to end today's show. I love it. Bob, before we go, where can people find you?
So we have a website called entrepreneurhouse.ca because we are a Canadian company, so we love our .cas. For those that aren't aware, it is the Canadian spelling of entrepreneur. I don't know if you guys spell it differently or not.
Do we spell it differently? We
I
spell
don't
a
know.
lot of things.
I know sometimes we put U's in words you don't want to use it. So it's entrepreneurhouse.ca, but you can always find it through my personal Facebook profile. We also have a Facebook page and a Facebook group. Now, the Facebook group is great because what we do is we invite people to jump in and ask any question they want, and our mentors work to help answer them completely free. We never ask for anything in return other than sort of some pay it forward methodology. So entrepreneurhouse.ca. If you have trouble finding the website, just find me personally at Bob Minhas, look me up on Facebook, or check out our group, which is Entrepreneur House, a source for business questions.
Awesome. So exciting. All right. So we will, of course, post up the links below. So hopefully you won't have such an issue finding the website if we post it in the comments. And then if you are watching and you are not yet a member of our Family Entrepreneur Life community, go ahead and head over to familyentrepreneur.life.com. It's a bunch of us family-focused entrepreneurs, those of us that are building our business to create that better life for our families. So we would love to have you join us. And, we do a lot of posting about business. We answer questions, but we also do a lot of posting about life. So we integrate our group with our business and life.
I got to add something. It is also a judgment-free group. So head over to Ariana's group because it is the one place I feel safe posting silly-ass questions. It is a no-judgment safe zone. And I know, Ariana, you're too humble to say that, but I'm going to say that. Is you and Tom safe zone for sure.
Thank you so much. And Bob, thank you so much for coming on and being so open and honest and vulnerable with your story. I mean, people need to hear this, and I love that you're so willing to share it with everyone. It's a powerful story, and I'm so excited to see where everything goes with Entrepreneur House. So we will keep in touch. Everyone, thank you so much for watching our episode tonight. If you're watching the replay, go ahead and post up any questions or comments, and we will, of course, come back to those, and you can feel free to tag us in those as well. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Night.